Welcome to Garden City Church, a place where you can belong before you believe. This week, George gives us part 2 of the Summer of Party. If you'd like to support us here at the channel, there's 3 ways you can do that. You can like and subscribe, you can share this video with a friend, or you can partner with us financially. You can do that through our website or by mailing us a check. We love you guys so much. Thank you for joining us. Let's get into the Word with George.
Welcome to our new series that we launched last week, Summer of Party. Our goal for this series is to learn to practice party the Jesus way this summer, to invite, to include, to eat with people, to give hospitality generously to those around us. And I'd like to start with the image I started with last week, the idea or this image of a fire hydrant that's just releasing water. And throughout the year, especially during the summer, fire hydrants are often released to help break out and clear any blockages that have formed from debris, calcification, pebbles, anything that could get stuck in the pipes. And the releasing of this water not only clears the blockages, functionally, it also provides a water party for the neighborhood and for the kids. I just love that image. It's an image that helps me get my mind around this concept we talked about last week, the concept or the practice of jubilee. Jesus identified with this idea or practice called jubilee in Luke chapter 4. He said this, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to liberate the oppressed and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor goes back and is connected to this Leviticus call, this Leviticus practice from the Old Testament to every 50 years, reset, restart, and refresh the relationships of the community. This is where the forgiveness of debt would happen, a time of resting the land and trusting God and resting in Him, a time of renewal, a time of freedom, and returning home back to your original land, back to your original families. Jubilee is the practice of removing any barrier to turn or return to each other. I love that, the removing of any barrier. If anger and hostility is a barrier, get that out, use forgiveness and hospitality, practice those things so that you can practice Jubilee coming together. Jesus had this unique way of embodying and calling other people to embody this practice of Jubilee. And the facet, the element we're going to look at today of Jubilee is this reality that if greed or debt or scarcity of resources are keeping you from coming together, if those things are separating you, the practice of release, the practice of generosity and fairness can bring us together and help us usher us into this Jubilee lifestyle. So there's a story going on that Jesus was living in. There was a history, a context, a reality that his ministry took place in. At the time of the writing of Leviticus, which was before Jesus, people who sold their land or had become so impoverished that they couldn't make good on what they owed would sometimes have to sell themselves and their family into an as indentured slaves. Or servitude for a time. They'd have to sell their property, like they would basically go from property to themselves and their family, and they would lose it all. And they would become servants or slaves of somebody. The Jubilee practice was a way of restoring those who had fallen into this destitute position back to freedom, back to their families, and back to their land. After all, God had freed them from Egypt to be a nation bent toward freedom, not to just fall into another form of slavery, another form of Egypt, nor were they called to emulate the enslaving ways of the Egyptians, because you have people who fall into destitution, you have people that are profiting off of that and can keep people destitute. And neither the destitute nor those who are benefiting was the call of Israel. In Jesus' era, systems of greed had begun to create what one theologian said was the practical equivalent of slavery by the way of progressive indebtedness. So the one responsible for this progressive indebtedness was like the leader at that time, Herod the Great. Heavy taxes and financial pressure was put and weighed down on property owners, forcing the peasant class to borrow predatory loans from lenders who often worked in concert with the governors and tax collectors and representatives of the governor. The property that was given as a security by the peasant, when he offered up his land, it quickly fell into the hands of the lenders who were working in cahoots with the governor again to gain more land and more wealth together through these shady and unjust practices. After losing their land and becoming a sharecropper or servant for the governor or whichever wealthy leader owned their land, it still got worse for the peasant. You see, the progressive indebtedness that of their unpaid debt continued to compound and, as one theologian writes, pile up to astronomical levels. Then, in order to regain his funds, the creditor/lender ordered the sharecropper to be sold with his wife and children or their family and all their possessions in order to cover the debt. The loss of land was followed by the loss of dignity and the loss of freedom. In this world, the powerful consumed the vulnerable and robbed them of their humanity. It was no wonder Jesus used the language of predatory consumption about the wealthy elite Pharisees. He said they devour widows' houses. This is predatory consumer language. These are people who are being consumed by somebody or a system. This is the world that Jesus proclaimed jubilee. This is the world that Jesus said that God has sent him to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the prisoner and recovery of sight to the blind, to liberate the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Gives new context when we read that passage, doesn't it? To know what was going on. Now, a jubilee that had been acknowledged by the Jewish leaders, but largely ignored through workarounds in the legal system, had kind of kept people still indebted. It had kept people who didn't have power without power or recourse. And Jesus' declaration and ministry of jubilee, ministry of freedom and forgiveness, created a new narrative. The good jubilee news that Jesus brought to the poor, the consumed, the ravaged, the exploited, and also the consumers, the exploiters, and the greedy. This was the good news. Any debt, work, or barrier to return to God has been wiped away and released. Now is the time to return to each other and return to God. God was wiping away the debt, and Jesus was proclaiming the way of the kingdom. In this way, both the consumer and the consumed were redeemed. Rather than pitted against each other, both were brought into transformation. So Jesus undermined the religious undermining of grace. Think about that again. Jesus undermined the religious undermining of grace with a law about sheer grace. This law was called the Jubilee. He out-Bibled the Bible guys, using their own scriptures against their religious schemes. Jesus said this, "What sorrow awaits you, Pharisees, for you are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens." Like you make sure to do all the religious tithing and giving toward your religious community, but you ignore justice and the love of God. You should tithe, yeah. That's great. You should give toward your faith community, but do not neglect the more important things. Do not participate in these unfair systems that are subjugating and enslaving and consuming your fellow image bearers. The genius of Jesus subverted their own religiosity against the religious and political systems of injustice and corruption. Jesus changes the narrative of a story of consumption. The powerful consumers exploiting the consumed. And he does this by introducing a new story of mutual stewardship, a way of living together that bends away from consumption, away from the story of greed and exploitation and selfishness, and bends toward freedom, toward fairness, and toward generosity. The time and the practice of Jubilee that Jesus brought released humanity from the separation that wealth, greed, and enslavement to money can cause. The Jubilee helps create conditions for people to not let these things prevent them from healthy and good relationships. And I want to call us to a time of Jubilee, to a time of reflection. How am I looking at what God has given me? Am I caring about those around me? Am I participating in systems that are consuming people or stewarding and giving toward them? Am I being responsible with what God has given me? Or am I getting enslaved to something that I shouldn't be enslaved to? Let's practice the Jubilee, because when we do this, when we start becoming freed and freeing others, when we release others, we can actually begin to come together and build relationships and build bridges where there was only chasms and separation. So let's practice this together.
How great this love, oh, it's moving on my mountains. This trusting love is with me to the end. How great this love, oh, it welcomes me like family. And anywhere I go, it meets me there. 'Cause He is good, and He is God. What I earned is not what I got, and He is just and also kind. What I deserve is not what I find. What more could I say about it? My God is love. How great this love, oh, it's faithful through my failures. This trusting love is with me to the end. How great this love, oh, it's closer than a brother. This is love. He died so I could live. And He is good, and He is God. What I earn is not what I've got. And He is just and also kind. What I deserve is not what I find. What could I say about it? My God is love. Well, I know my God is love. I know my God is love. This is enough to know my God is love. I know my God is love. I know my God is love. This is enough to know my God is love. 'Cause I know my God is love. I know my God is love. This is enough to know my God is love. I know my God is love. I know my God is love. This is enough to know my God is love. How great this love, oh, it welcomes me like family. And anywhere I go, it meets me